Hello, I'm Peter Loockx. I'm working for ETWI, an expert center in Belgium to build bridges again to different kind of museums, governments, and other collectors. For the moment, I'm working on the Asbestos Project. So we are building up a database with asbestos applications in heritage, in collections. So that's the whole lecture that you're going to hear. So welcome to the lecture of asbestos in heritage collections in Belgium and the implication of asbestos in those collections. I'm Peter Loockx. I'm working for ETWI, an expert center from Belgium for Belgian museums, collectors, concerning the technical and scientific immaterial heritage. Our team provides a network through different museums, collectors, government, and other institutions who are working in the field of industry and scientific heritage. So next to our vast network, we provide extra research and expertise on those topics. I myself worked for 16 years as an asbestos expert for a company mainly doing surveillance for different kinds of industries. And next to the surveys, I was also an asbestos teacher for many years, where I tried to explain the dangers of asbestos and how to recognize and remove asbestos applications. In the last year, I started a new path as a researcher for the Asbestos Project, going back to my roots as an art historian. So I'm back to the basics. So one of the most underestimated problems in many museum collections is the presence of dangerous materials or applications in industrial and even common household goods. So the Asbestos Project started a few years ago with a lecture on dangerous materials, and in the years that followed, ETWI organized a forum with collection administrators, restoration and conservation companies, and asbestos experts. And in the summer of 2020, we started the Asbestos Project. The most striking fact was that the two worlds of the asbestos experts and the museum collections didn't match. The main reason was that the asbestos experts didn't have the knowledge of old materials because of their expertise lies mainly in asbestos recognition of building materials and in buildings. And on the other hand, most of the collection administrators were not aware of the dangers of asbestos, where the product was used, and above all, the abundant use of asbestos in the late 19th century and throughout the 20th century, with the highest peak in the 70s even. On the presentation, you see the collection of the asbestos materials. That's a nice example because it's one of the cases with asbestos stones in it, and it was one of the students who put down the note, asbestos do not open, so the professor was aware of the danger, but didn't care enough about it. So that's a really good example of the situation here in Belgium and most parts of the rest of the world also. To give a little bit an idea of what asbestos is, well, asbestos is a natural mineral. There are 6 minerals, silicate-based minerals that are named asbestos. So the most commonly known is chrysotyl, amosites, and crocidolites. The chrysotyl is the most used asbestos kind. You see on the right the stone with asbestos on it, with chrysotyl on it. But you see also the brown asbestos, that's more the amosites. And the blue asbestos, that's the crocidolites. The tremolites, actinolites, and anthophylites are also asbestos, is also an asbestos mineral, but it's less common than the other ones. You can see also the guy who is pulling out the asbestos fibers, and you see really the flexibility of the fibers. So that's a really typical thing. It's kind of cotton candy effects that you have with the fibers. The asbestos is mined in open quarries. The most famous are the Thetford mine and the Jeffrey mine in Canada. This is a John Manville company that also owns the Jeffrey mine, but also in the US, in South Africa, Italy, Germany, there were also asbestos mines. And still in Russia and in China, there are still working mines for the moment. Also, the production of asbestos is still continuing in those lands. The production sites, what you can see is the typical, the asbestos was gained, but it has to be treated. It has to be kind of broken like flax. So you see one of the guys who is working with pure asbestos in a machine to break it and to make the typical products: asbestos cement, asbestos rope, rubber applications, the typical gaskets, but even paint, insulation, brakes. There's a lot of asbestos used in different kinds of industries. But what is the danger of asbestos? Well, the asbestos fiber can split into smaller fibers, 0.01 micrometer, that it can break up. So you see a hair, human hair, and you see the little small fibers over here. These are the asbestos fibers. So that's the real danger of asbestos. It's too small, and when you inhale it, it's going to last in your lungs. It's going to go to your alveoli. And it can infect also the pleural membrane. So that's really one of the problems of asbestos. The latency time before the disease is really coming out is 20 to 40 years. And it can cause lung cancer, mesothelioma, pleural cancer. So that's one of the two main problems of asbestos. Another problem is the asbestos fiber is invisible and causes no direct irritations. So that's really one of the problems. Therefore, the underestimation of the problem can really be life-threatening. And there is a simple solution. You can protect yourself with a mask, an FFP3 mask, and that's the easiest way to protect yourself from this danger, of this possible danger. So as we started the Asbestos Project in August 2020 to bring those two worlds back together, so the asbestos expert and the museum world, to develop a program where asbestos recognition and awareness of the danger of asbestos plays a major role. We decided to start building a database with asbestos objects from different partner collections to improve the general knowledge of where to find asbestos. And secondly, to provide an easy flowchart and guideline how to protect yourself and the collection from asbestos contamination and what to do with asbestos applications. So in our first year, we partnered up with 10 collections, from the Industry Museum in Ghent to the National War Heritage Museum in Brussels, a gin brewery museum, a collection of different universities, photography museum in Antwerp, Museum of Daily Life, House of Alain in Ghent, the Red Star Line Museum in Antwerp, and a small local history museum near Antwerp with an asbestos collection of an old rubber and asbestos manufactory. They were mainly making gaskets, but it's still a really nice collection, but a little bit of a dangerous collection also. So the most concerning fact was the lack of knowledge of asbestos applications, as previously stated, but also the status of and the condition of the asbestos applications in the appliances. I'll give you some examples. We have a velvet press here in the Industry Museum of Ghent, and you see the insulation pipe. It's completely made out of asbestos. So this is really the 99% asbestos that is really turned around, really around the insulation pipe over here. Also, the next one, the flamethrower suits. It's in the War Heritage Collection in Brussels. It's completely made out of the chrysotil, the blue asbestos fibers, and it's one of the crown pieces of the museum also. And since this year or last year, it is sealed in a special box, so so no asbestos fibers can escape the perimeter. So that's really one of the nice and dangerous pieces of the museum. But also the wine filter in the Geneva Gin Museum in Hasselt. We have a wine filter here, and there are still some wine filters in the application. So we didn't know there was still asbestos in it, but it was there was still asbestos in the filters itself. Also, the museum collections, the university collections, we see an electrical application over here, where you can see here the detail where the asbestos is really coming out of the application. So they stuffed really the asbestos, pure asbestos, in the lamp of this collection. But also in an oven, a university collection of Antwerp, it's still in use, and you can see the ring, the asbestos ring, the rope, the textile in the door of the oven. It's still in use. It's also a collection piece, but it's still in use, and it still has some asbestos in it. And then a spectrograph, university collection of Ghent, where they used asbestos rope on one of the tubes. It is encapsulated with foil, but still there is still some asbestos left that's not encapsulated. So there are really some pieces around the instrument with asbestos. So that's really can be a danger. It can be a contamination of the rest of the collection also. That's really problematic. The movie projectors, I'm going to explain the case later on. These are the movie projectors of the Photography Museum in Antwerp. A disinfection dispenser from the Red Star Line Museum. It was used to spray the people and the objects before entering the boats who came to America. So it's a really nice, unique piece. There was an asbestos cloth around the dispenser. It is removed by an asbestos worker. So now it's practically safe to put it on display. And even a simple toaster with asbestos cardboard in it. It's in the House of Alain, house of the Museum of Daily Life, where you can find a lot of asbestos in typical household products. This is one of the examples also from the inside from the movie projector, where the asbestos cardboard is really visible. But I'm going to explain this later on also. And last but not least, the asbestos glove in the Toeninum, the local history museum in Deurne, where you can find a glove, an asbestos glove on display, and it's open. The people, they knew about it, but they weren't really concerned about the asbestos. So it was still on display when we went there. And little cabinets with the rope and gaskets that the manufacturer of rubber and asbestos company made. So first we have to provide the asbestos recognition tool to the museums. This is a fairly simple asbestos schematic or flowchart to determine the possible presence of asbestos in the collections. And the flowchart will be based on the different properties of asbestos, for example, the heat resistance, the acoustic dampening, and so on, because there's a lot of different properties for asbestos. And the flowchart will be accompanied with a database with photos and information where to find asbestos applications in the appliances. A nice example is a steam boiler in the Museum of Hasselt, the gin brewery, where you can find a hatch with an asbestos rope around it. So it's still work in progress, but I hope we can provide it very soon with a lot of examples of asbestos applications. And secondly, the conservation and storage of asbestos items. Too often we see the asbestos objects are condemned to the dungeons of the museum to be stowed away and never to be seen again. Apart from this dramatic presentation, I have to admit it was a little bit dramatic. This is often the cheapest way to deal with asbestos objects because of the high cost of conservation and removal of asbestos. So the case I would like to present is the case of the movie projectors. The asbestos is mostly used for specific purposes based on its properties. Most commonly known is the heat-resistant property of asbestos. For example, the fire-resisting in firefighting suits or fire blankets, but also in movie projectors. The inner casing of the most projectors are covered with asbestos paper and cardboard, like you see over here. So it is completely made out of cardboard. The white cardboard is an asbestos cardboard, but also the wires. You have the electrical wires that are completely wired in asbestos fabric. But also the film reels over here, there are asbestos cardboard around. But also the curtain of the movie projector is also completely made out of asbestos. So that's really one of the problems that they were facing in the photography museum in Antwerp. So it's no surprise that asbestos is used in those movie projectors because of the highly flammable pellicules, of course. One of the cases we are working on is the art handling of these projectors. They were scheduled to be transported to a new depot, but there were some problems with the asbestos, of course. To get a clearer overview of the problems concerning the contamination of asbestos fibers, we conducted a survey, and the results were as feared at most concerning. Although we didn't find any free-floating asbestos fibers in the air, which is the main concern when asbestos fibers are inhaled, still we find asbestos fibers on the adhesive samples. So you have 2 photos of the adhesive samples that we took. So 3 of the 12 samples were positive with asbestos on it. The air sample, there was no asbestos detected. Thus, removing or transporting those projectors can cause the asbestos paper or cardboard to break and fall down, and thus contaminating the old and new depot, but also the clothing of the art handlers, which can lead to inhaling the fibers, and later in life can cause lung cancer or mesothelioma. So before handling the projectors, they had to be treated to eliminate the risk of contamination. And there were 3 possibilities that presented themselves. For the first, the asbestos removal of the dangerous material in situ. So the problem is the building, they have to build an hermetic zone, an hermetic enclosure with filtered air extraction specialist personnel to do the work. Often the specialists work for demolition companies, so they are not used to work with delicate objects. And this is the way, this is always an expensive choice, especially because the museum wants to reassign the projectors to another museum. So for them, it's really a double loss also. And on the other hand, there is a concern about the implicit value of asbestos in an heritage object. In other words, the object loses an application that is part of the history, functionality, and context of the object also. Thus, the choice they have to make for every object, whether to hold or to remove the asbestos application, is really something that they have to consider. And as always, time is of an essence, so there is not a lot of time to remove them. So it's one of the problems also. So even when the museum has made her mind up on holding on to some of the asbestos, restoration company has to consolidate the application, which is very difficult in situ, which is the cellar of the museum. So the transportation of the object is still on the table. We commissioned a study with the Asbestos Project to examine the best way to consolidate the asbestos application without the risk of health of the restorer or later on the museum staff or the visitors. So this brings us to the last option, an adequate way of packing the objects so no asbestos can escape. So according to the Belgian law and in most of the countries with asbestos laws, asbestos has to be double packed in transparent foil and marked with an asbestos label. So the other problem in this way is handling or packing. In this case, a restoration company uses dark foil so nobody knows what's in it. There's the first photo. There is no photo, even worse, no identification number on the packed objects. And the second problem is the tape that is wrapped around the foil. So trying to open the tape without ripping the foil is nearly impossible. So we have to come prepared with more duct tape to seal it back up. It's a really good example here in the incubator. It was completely packed with the tape, and it was impossible to open. So another study that the Asbestos Project has ordered is to examine the possibilities of finding the right way to pack the objects with an easy mechanism to open and close a double bag, and once bagged, to provide a safe way to handle and transport the object without the risk of further contamination, and in the best case with climatological or other monitoring devices near or in the sealed object. So to conclude, asbestos is stowaway in many collections. Be alert for asbestos. Be aware of the problem and protect yourself for inhaling asbestos fibers with the appropriate mask, an FFP3 mask. So that's the main reason and the main concern of the asbestos in the collections.